Close your eyes, relax, and enjoy the story The Silent Caravanserai. 3 weeks later, Jeremy was no longer an archivist. He was a fugitive, though a well-funded one. The discovery of the salt cipher had not remained a secret for long. By the morning after his discovery, the High Chancellor's men had broken down the library doors, not for a routine audit, but because the simultaneous ticking of 500 dead clocks had been heard across the entire city, waking the king from his stupor. Master Corvus had been arrested within the hour, accused of practicing the geometric arts, the forbidden science of sound and alignment that had brought about the great cataclysm centuries prior. Jeremy had escaped through the waste chutes of the scriptorium, carrying nothing but his travel cloak, a water skin, and the original vellum map, which he had cut clean out of the ledger with his paring knife. Now he sat in the corner of a low-ceilinged tavern in the border town of Dust Underhill. Here, the snow of the north gave way to the gray, stony flats that eventually became the great southern desert known as the Shifting Shards. The air here was different, drier, smelling of dung smoke and roasted lentils. "You look like a boy who has spent too much time reading by bad light," a voice said. A woman slid onto the bench opposite him without asking. She wore a coat made of overlapping leather plates, stained the color of dried mud, and her hair was sheared close to her skull on one side, the rest braided with small brass rings that clicked together when she moved. A heavy, curved knife hung from her belt, its pommel worn smooth by use. "I am looking for a guide," Jeremy said, keeping his hand over the old oilcloth package on his lap. "Everyone here is a guide, scholar," she replied, leaning back and eyeing his clean hands. "The question is whether you want a guide who takes your coin and leaves you for the vultures 3 miles past the border stone, or someone who actually knows how to listen to the stones." "My name is Jeremy." "Mara," she said. She glanced down at his package. "You've got that look about you. The I have a secret that's going to get me killed look. The town is crawling with the Chancellor's redcoats. They aren't looking for smugglers this time. They're looking for a thief who stole a piece of an old book. You wouldn't happen to know anything about that, would you?" Jeremy felt his stomach drop. He moved his hand toward his pocket, where his iron penknife lay, but Mara merely laughed. A short, sharp sound like a crow's bark. "Relax, ink stainer. If I wanted the bounty, I'd have brought 3 men with pikes. The Chancellor's gold is worthless down south anyway. The merchants in the shards only take salt block or silver weight. But I am interested in what's in the cloth. I've seen that specific shape before." "Where?" Jeremy asked, leaning forward. "My father was a sand sealer," Mara said, her playfulness vanishing, replaced by a cold, hard focus. "He spent 20 years looking for the pillars of the sun. He had a map that looked just like that, cut out of a book from some northern library. He died in the Red Dunes because he couldn't read the script. He said the map was missing its voice." Jeremy looked at her, seeing the intensity in her dark eyes. He reached down, undid the twine on the oilcloth, and peeled back the layers to reveal the amber-stained vellum. The salt lines had hardened now, permanent and raised against the dark hide. Mara breathed in sharply. She didn't touch it, but her hand moved instinctively to the brass rings in her hair, as if checking their alignment. He was right, it's the score. You know how to read it. No, she said, looking up at him. But I know where the instrument is. 3 days later, they crossed the border into the shifting shards. The transition was abrupt. 1 mile was gray rock and scrub pine. The next was an endless expanse of orange and crimson sand that rose in massive, knife-edged ridges toward the horizon. The heat was immense, hitting Jeremy like a physical blow after years in the frozen libraries of Oakhaven. His skin began to peel within hours, and the salt from his own sweat stung his eyes until he could barely see the tracks of Mara's camel ahead of him. They traveled by night, when the desert cooled to a bitter, shivering temperature that reminded him of home. The dunes, Jeremy discovered, were not silent. As the wind blew across the sharp crests of the sand, the desert produced a low, continuous drone, a sound like 1,000 distant cellos playing a single, unresolved chord. The sands are singing, Jeremy said during their 3rd night on the trail, his voice cracked from dust. They're always singing, Mara said, adjusting the linen scarf wrapped around her face. But mostly they're just clearing their throats. The real music only happens at the wells. If you don't know the tune, the sand fills your throat while you sleep. That's why the syndicates used the cipher. It wasn't to keep people out. It was to keep people alive. Where are we going, Mara? She pointed toward a cluster of black, jagged shapes rising out of the sand 3 miles ahead. They looked like the broken teeth of a giant beast. The silent Caravanserai. It was an old outpost before the waters dried up. My father found the first register there. If your map is real, the keystone should be in the central cistern. As they drew closer, Jeremy realized the shapes were not rock, but massive structures made of fused glass, dark green and translucent, half buried by the encroaching dunes. The wind passing through the hollow window frames of these glass towers created a different sound, a high, whistling whine that clashed horribly with the low drone of the sand. It made Jeremy's teeth ache. They dismounted their camels at the entrance to the main courtyard. The ground here was covered in a layer of fine, white powder that wasn't sand. Salt, Jeremy whispered, kneeling down to taste a grain. It was identical to the crystals on the map. Don't linger, Mara warned, her hand on the hilt of her blade. The wind changes quickly here. If the low chord drops an octave, it means a shard storm is coming. They entered the central structure, a vast circular hall with a collapsed dome. In the center of the floor was a deep, stone-lined pit, the cistern. A rusted iron ladder led down into the darkness. Jeremy took his lantern, lit the wick, and began the descent. The air below was remarkably cold, smelling of ancient copper and dry stone. When his boots touched the bottom, The light of his lantern revealed a massive bronze cylinder rising from the center of the cistern floor. It was covered in hundreds of thin, concentric rings, each one stamped with the same syndical symbols he had traced in the Oakhaven library. Mara scrambled down after him, her rings clinking against the iron rungs. She looked at the cylinder, her breath catching. The Great Polyphon! My father thought it was a myth. Jeremy approached the device. He pulled out the map, laying it flat on a stone ledge near the cylinder. "It's a combination lock," he said, his eyes scanning the amber ridges of the vellum. "But it doesn't open a door. It changes the pitch of the towers above." Why would anyone want to change the pitch? "To cancel the storm," Jeremy said, the realization hitting him with the force of an illumination. "The cataclysm wasn't an explosion, Mara. It was a resonance. The ancient cities didn't burn. They shook themselves to pieces because the architecture caught the wrong wind. This outpost was a dampener. It was built to keep the desert quiet." He reached out toward the first bronze ring. It was cold, resistant to his touch, stuck fast by centuries of dust and corrosion. "Help me," he said. Together, using their combined weight, they threw themselves against the bronze fin of the top ring. With a horrible metal-on-metal screech that echoed through the cistern like a scream, the ring moved 3 inches to the left. Above them, the high, whistling whine of the glass towers shifted. The tone dropped slightly, becoming rounder, less aggressive. "It's working," Mara said, a rare smile breaking through her dust-stained face. "Look at the symbols." Jeremy aligned the first row with the first line of the cipher on his map. The bronze ring clicked into place with a deep, satisfying thud that vibrated through the stone floor. He moved to the second ring, but before he could touch it, a shadow fell over the top of the cistern ladder. "An impressive piece of scholarship, Master Jeremy," a voice called down from the rim. Jeremy looked up. Framed against the starry desert sky was the silhouette of a man wearing the high, pointed hat of the king's inquisitors. Behind him stood 4 soldiers, their crossbows leveled into the pit.